This is race number 6 of the Rothmans Porsche Turbo Cup Series. We're at Le Circuit, Mont, Tremblant, Quebec. Hello, everybody. I'm Joe Tilley with Pat Gonzalez for what is the pivotal race for series points leader Scott Goodyear. It's a result of a surprise lineup change for today's race. Pat?
Joe, Scott Goodyear, who's been so dominant during the racing, has once again been plagued by qualifying gremlins. Goodyear will start on the 21st grid position out of 24 entrants. Scott also had qualifying problems at our last Rothmans Porsche event at Shannonville Motorsport Park. This first rain race produced a titanic battle between Richard Spinard and Stéphane Preux. Both drivers swapped the lead several times, with Preux coming out the winner, his first of the season.
The second surprise is what you see right here. Series regular David Deacon is unable to make it because of a previous business commitment, so in his place, driving the Cook Racing Motomaster entry, is a veteran, Jacques Villeneuve.
Jacques has not been in a race car for some time, but fans will remember his earlier wins in Can-Am. That success vaulted him into the kart series for Indy-style cars, where he was a top runner, eventually winning one of the events. At Mont Tremblant, Jacques has pulled out all the stops, taking the Motomaster Cook Motors Porsche to its limit and grabbing the pole position for the 6th race of the series. A tremendous feat for a man who has had such a long dry spell from both behind the wheel of a race car and at this picturesque circuit.
Mont Tremblant, I haven't been here. I mean, I've been racing this track for 10 years. The last time it was at 78. I raced the Formula 4 here. I was here 3 years ago for my nephew when he did his driving school, so I drove around, but I mean, just with a street car, not with any racing car.
His nephew, by the way, is the son of probably the best driver in Canadian history, the late Gilles Villeneuve. Young Jacques will be driving in Formula 3 in Europe next year, trying to continue the Villeneuve dynasty.
And you're watching that family skill in action as Uncle Jacques takes us on a quick tour of Le Circuit Mont Tremblant. This track is probably one of the most beautiful in North America and has a long and eventful history, hosting the early Formula 1 drivers such as Jackie Stewart, whose son John is also going to run in that same Formula 3 series, Sterling Moss and Canadian George Eaton.
The course is made up of a series of very fast sweeping corners and long straights that will test those Pirelli P0 tires, the Porsche factory prepared engines, and the skill of these drivers.
Villeneuve tested all those factors as he qualified at a minute 50.854 seconds at an average speed of just over 86 miles an hour.
A demanding circuit just waiting for these 24 drivers. Let's check out the point standings as we head into this 6th race. Scott Goodyear has 118 points, just 6 ahead of Stéphane Preux, who will forego this race for a Formula Atlantic event in the U.S. So if Goodyear can somehow pull off a win after starting 21st on the grid today, he'll have an almost insurmountable lead for the overall championship.
The only other driver with any chance would be the defending champion Richard Spinard, who is 17 points back in 3rd position.
Jacques Villeneuve is loose and looks like he's ready to go. This race could ultimately decide the championship, and we'll be back with the start of the Rothmans Porsche Turbo Cup from Mont Tremblant right after this. Welcome back to Le Circuit Mont Tremblant, Quebec for round 6 of the Rothmans Porsche Turbo Cup Series. The 24 starters are weaving back and forth, warming those Pirellis. Here's Pat Gonzalez with the starting lineup.
On the pole position for today's race, Jacques Villeneuve in the Cook Racing Porsche. Villeneuve qualifying extremely well, and outside, Richard Spinard. In row number 2, it'll be Rick Bye in the Reebok Porsche, and alongside the ever-improving Richard Laporte. In row number 3 will be Chris Gleason, the only American driver from Pennsylvania, and alongside young Dirk Homan of Calgary. In the 4th row will be Jacques Bienvenu and Case Nierop, Lily Evan Malcolm in 5. The 6th row, Tennyson and Empringham, Champion and Demaray in 7, Boyer and Schill make up row 8. The 9th row, Gu and Seabrook, Aberman and Caruso, followed by Scott Goodyear and Ted Powell, and finally Uli Bieri alongside of Len Campbell. You're on board Rick Bye's car as we come up looking for the starter's flag, and there it is. We're racing here at Mont Tremblant. Villeneuve goes to the front. Spinard will battle around the Reebok Porsche of Rick Bye in a second. Bye will tuck in here in 3rd place as the drivers go downhill and then uphill through the very picturesque turn number 1 here at Mont Tremblant. Villeneuve smokes the tires under heavy braking. Spinard right there in second, Rick By third. Then it is Chris Gleason fourth, Jacques Bienvenu fifth, and Richard Laporte back in sixth. You're on board the sixth place driver, Richard Laporte, as he tries to work his way a little bit closer to car number 89 there, Jacques Bienvenu. Single file through this right-hander. It is Villeneuve leading, Spinard by, still Gleason in fourth, and then a train of cars that is led by 89 Bienvenu. He has Laporte and Case Nierop tucked in. Scott Goodyear is already past several drivers. He is making a charge to the front. It is Villeneuve and Spinard, a bit of a two-car breakaway here on this opening lap. And you're on board Scott Goodyear. He has worked his way around 8 cars. He is running 13th. He'll pull up alongside of Brian Malcolm. Back down to the inside of David Epringham, and Goodyear has picked up 2 positions on the back straightaway here at Mont Tremblant. Joe Scott is charging.
Not even a half a lap gone. Scott Goodyear has already moved up into 11th spot. How long is it going to take before he's up challenging for the lead?
Well, here's Rick By as he looks at the 2-car battle ahead of him. Rick has closed up some of that gap on Jacques Villeneuve and Richard Spinard. They're part of the crew anxiously looking at their stopwatches. There is Goodyear, tries to go to the inside of Cam Champion. He could not get around, and now he finally does get around the number 4 Porsche there of Cam Champion. Jacques Villeneuve in car number 44, and again Jacques hard on the brakes. He smokes the tires in Namero. Spinard is right there in second, and then Rick By in car number 8, the Reebok Porsche, very much in the hunt. Back aboard Scott Goodyear's car, he continues to charge back up through the field as Goodyear's picking them off one by one across the start-finish line. Scott Goodyear going by there, the number 50 car of Dirk Homan. Jacques Villeneuve, your leader, Spinard in by. That is the race right now, but these drivers better be looking in their rear view mirrors. Scott Goodyear is making a tremendous charge to the front.
Now this may be the easiest part of the day for Scott because Villeneuve is setting a torrid pace at the front of the race, and it's going to be very tough for Goodyear to make any ground on the top 3 drivers.
Goodyear is tenacious as he goes after the other drivers. There you see him slamming his hand on the wheel.
He had mechanical problems during qualifying, so I asked him about his race strategy.
Well, the Porsche technicians found out the part that was incapable of working correctly, and I think right now that we have found it, but we don't know until we track test it, and we're not going to be able to track test it until we get on the racetrack for the race, so it's going to be an interesting afternoon.
Scott Goodyear has worked his way into 8th place as he goes after Case Nierop. Just ahead of him, Scott getting up out of the speed curbing, and the vibrations breaking up the picture from the Sony Handycam. There you can see the 3 cars just ahead of Scott Goodyear. You're back with the leader, Jacques Villeneuve, as again he smokes the tires running through Namero. Spinard still in second. Rick By is right there in third, and Rick By, Joe, is turning in a tremendous run here in the early going.
This is by far Rick By's best race of the series so far. Rick's racing very well. He qualified well. 3 of those Reebok Porsches qualified in the top 5, so this is a big day for that team.
Scott Goodyear continues to charge to the front after starting 21st. You're on board the leader. Jacques Villeneuve is first, Rothmans Porsche race, and he is leading here in the early going. There you can see Villeneuve. He has been pushing it very, very hard, smoking the tires, locking up the front wheels on several occasions, but Jacques continues to run to the front of this 24-car field. Villeneuve, very, very strong here at Mont Tremblant, but you can see right there Spinard and Rick By just waiting for that one slight mistake to pounce on the leader, Villeneuve. Chris Gleason having a good run in 4th. It is Richard Laporte in 5th, then Jacques Bienvenu 6th, Case Nierop 7th, and Scott Goodyear back in that 8th place position. But Goodyear has done a marvelous job of carving his way through traffic to get to the front. Here he is, pulling up alongside of Case Nierop. Scott Goodyear into 7th. And now the goal will be that 89 Porsche of Jacques Bienvenu as he's close to within just a couple of car lengths. And you're on board Scott Goodyear as he makes that charge to the front of the field. They're on the back straightaway here at Mont Tremblant. There's the drafty, a pull alongside now of number 89, Jacques Bienvenu, and Goodyear has made his way into 6th. What an incredible charge by Goodyear, Joe.
Don't forget now that Scott Goodyear started 21st on the grid here today. He doesn't want to pick up a couple of championship points. He's interested in finishing the top 3, perhaps even winning this race. And those aren't pylons he's passing. He's passing people like Case Nierop. Nierop is a 1986 series champion.
The leader, Jacques Villeneuve, back through Namero, Spinard, and Rick By right there with him. And, of course, a great crowd on hand here at Mont Tremblant. Some dedicated motorsport fans watching a tremendous battle.
There's the leaderboard. Villeneuve, the crowd favorite, opening up his lead. Spinard by Gleason, Laporte. Then it's Scott Goodyear, now in sixth spot. Case Nerub, Jacques Bienvenu, Jacques Liliev, and David Tennyson in 10th.
The question now, how close to Jacques Villeneuve can Scott Goodyear get? And again, Villeneuve, who has smoked the tires several times, but continues to hold on to the lead aboard that number 44 Cook Racing Porsche. Spinard dropping a few car lengths further back now. Spinard perhaps having problems staying with the pace, being turned in here by Jacques Villeneuve. There you can see Spinard, who was second in our last race in the wet there at Shannonville to Prue, and Spinard putting a couple of wheels off, so he is pushing it very hard. You're on board Rick Bye's car, the Sony Handycam, providing us those pictures. Scott Goodyear, perhaps the fastest car on the racetrack right now. The question is, can he catch Jacques Villeneuve after he has come all the way up to 6th from that 21st starting position? The task becomes more difficult now because the drivers he's trying to pass are some of the best in the business. Villeneuve, the leader, off the end of the straightaway. It is still Spinard and Bye.
Jacques Villeneuve looks like he's been driving these turbo Porsches for years. He's got great car control, and obviously he hasn't forgotten his way around Mont Tremblant. I asked him earlier if Richard Spinard would be his main competition here today.
That's going to be tough because, Richard Spinard, who's second right now to me, is used and got good experience with the car in this series. The guys raced, 6, 8, 7 races so far this year. And, Scott Goodyear's, Rick Bye was my teammate, was in third place. So there's a lot of a good guy out there, Jacques Bienvenu. They have experience with the car. I know we have a little problem with making the tire last the whole race sometimes. We've got to be easy with it. And it's not really a game I'm used to play. I'm usually a charger from the start to the end, so it's going to be different,
Jacques continues his charge to the checkered flag ahead of Richard Spinard, and we'll be back with more Rothmans Porsche racing action from Mont Tremblant, Quebec in a moment. Welcome back to Le Circuit Mont Tremblant, Quebec in the Rothmans Porsche Turbo Cup Series Round 6. You're on board with Scott Goodyear as he has worked his way up from 21st to 6th. No, make that 5th. He just blew past Richard Laporte.
And just ahead of Scott Goodyear, the 4th place driver, Chris Gleason, and Gleason just a few car lengths ahead of Goodyear as he continues his tremendous charge from the back of the starting grid after having his problems in qualifying. There is the 17th place battle. Some great racing all the way through the pack. That is Norman Boyer just ahead of Reinhold Schill, Seabrook, Bieri, and Aberman also involved in that 5-car battle for 17th place. The leaders going through, and here is Scott Goodyear. He is right on Chris Gleason as they go down the hill into turn number 1. Goodyear to within half a car length. Villeneuve followed by Spinard and Rick Bye, and there is the interval back to Chris Gleason. Goodyear right there along with Laporte.
Goodyear now challenging for 4th after starting 21st on the grid. Now he's trying to set up Gleason for a pass.
Scott Goodyear charging hard out of the corner. He's to within a car length. He pulls to the inside of Gleason, and Scott Goodyear has moved into that 4th place position. The question now is, can Scott Goodyear catch the front running 3 drivers?
Just notice a little bit of drizzle there on Scott Goodyear's windshield. I don't know if it'll have that much of a factor on this race. It's not raining too terribly hard right now.
Richard Laporte also working hard here to get around Chris Gleason. There's the leader, Villeneuve. And then the battle for 2nd place. Rick Bye is all over Richard Spinard. You're on board the 3rd place driver, Rick Bye, as on the back straightaway, Spinard is able to pull a little bit further ahead of Rick Bye's Reebok Porsche. That's a long run up the back straightaway here at Mont Tremblant. Spinard able to stretch it out a little bit, but Rick Bye able to gather it back up. There you can see just how far back of the front-running 3 cars Scott Goodyear is. Then it is Gleason followed by Laporte, and still very close racing all the way through the top 10.
Now we're on board the car of Richard Laporte. He's a rookie in this series, but he established himself last year in Formula 2000. Richard Laporte having a great rookie season. 2 races ago at Mosport Park, he finished 2nd. He'd like to finish strong here again today.
Well, that 2nd place finish at Mosport, Joe, had to be a big confidence booster, and here is Laporte closing on Chris Gleason as they run it up through Namuro. He's to within just a car length, and there you can see ahead of Laporte, Scott Goodyear continuing to pull away. That battle side by side for 17th between Boyer 86 and Reinhold Schill 29. Side by side into the turn. Schill has to back out. Boyer will hold on to that position, and the crowd enjoying some terrific racing action here at Mont Tremblant. Further back in the pack, that is Brian Malcolm working on David Empringham. Empringham's first race here in the Rothmans Porsche Series, taking over for Stefan Prue. The leader, Jacques Villeneuve, at the end of the back straightaway. Then Spenard and Rick Bye again has close to within just 3 or 4 car lengths of Spenard, as Spenard has been unable to shake Rick Bye, as Bye has been right there with him since the opening lap. They come under the bridge, and again Rick Bye will close it up under braking. Spenard has his hands full with Bye and appears to be losing more ground to the leader, Villeneuve.
The only driving Jacques Villeneuve has done lately is in supercars, and Jacques says it really helps him handle a car, helps him get used to being close to the surface and his handling ability. Look at this, Goodyear locks up his brakes and he leaves the track.
Goodyear off the racetrack, does a nice job of keeping it out of the tire walls, gets it back under control and is on the racetrack, but Gleason and Laporte have gone through, and here is Case Nierop. Nierop will move around Goodyear. Scott going all the way back into the 7th place position. So Goodyear loses 3 spots with that mistake through Namero.
Goodyear looked like he was ready to challenge for the lead, but that mistake is going to cost him. Here's a look at the standings now. Jacques Villeneuve stretching that lead out. Richard Spenard in second, followed by Bye, Gleason, Laporte, Nierop, Scott Goodyear now back in 7th. Then it's Lilia, Bienvenue, and David Tennyson.
Scott Goodyear has really got his work cut out for him now. He's back in that 7th place position, and he's got to do a lot more passing before he can get up to the front of those front-running 3 cars of Villeneuve, Spenard, and Rick Bye. You're on board Rick Bye's Porsche as he tries to close on the 2nd place car of Richard Spenard. Up the back straightaway here at Mont Tremblant. It is Spenard in that 2nd place position, but Rick Bye working the draft at the end of the straightaway. Bye looked to the inside for a moment, but then decided to follow in line as he has been sitting right there with Spenard throughout most of this race. There is Scott Goodyear. He'll pick up that 6th place position as he now goes back around Case Nierop. So Scott again carving his way back up through the field.
There's a rear view from Rick Bye's Porsche as he enters Namero. Here you must be cool and calm when setting your car up. I asked Case Nierop what part emotion played in driving well.
It does play a big part. Although once you're in the car, you don't really think about it anymore. Like every time I get in the car, I do go out there and do a lap or do 2 laps. I do give it my all. I do try and do the best. And the getting mad or the being happy doesn't really come until after you get out of the car and find out what you've done or how the car feels or whatever.
There is one driver who's been giving it his all here this afternoon. Scott Goodyear has worked his way back into 4th. He has passed Richard Laporte and Chris Gleason, and now must charge after the front-running 3 drivers. Villeneuve going through, Spenard and Rick Bye still locked in a monumental battle for that 2nd place position. And then it is Scott Goodyear in that Pop 84 Porsche. Can Scott catch the front-running 3 drivers before the checkered flag comes out here at Mont Tremblant? There is Jacques Villeneuve. He has been the leader since the drop of the green flag. Spenard in 2nd, Rick Bye runs 3rd.
I think it's safe to say, Pat, that all Jacques Villeneuve has to do is keep his car on the track in order to bag this Rothmans Porsche race. And we'll be back with more from Mont Tremblant with a conclusion after this. This is Mont Tremblant, Quebec, and round 6 of the 8-race Rothmans Porsche Turbo Cup Series. I'm Joe Tully along with Pat Gonzalez, and we're winding down this high-speed contest that St. Cuthbert's Jacques Villeneuve has led from the green flag.
Norman Boyer battling further back in the pack, and there's Boyer losing control of his car. He'll gather it back up. You're back with the leader, Jacques Villeneuve, in that number 44 Cook Racing Porsche. There you can see just how much of a lead Jacques has stretched out here on this tremendous race for 2nd place between Richard Spenard and Rick Bye, and Bye has just stayed right with Spenard throughout this race. He's not been able to get around Richard Spenard, but as they go up the back straightaway here at Mont Tremblant, Bye staying right with him. He'll try to work the draft, and there you can see from the rear camera on Rick Bye's car, Scott Goodyear, as he closes up on the Reebok Porsche. Scott Goodyear has made an incredible charge up through the pack, and no problems with the Rick Bye car.
Serious.
There's a fire aboard Rick Bye's Porsche. There you can see from Scott Goodyear's car, Rick Bye weaving back and forth. Scott Goodyear having to battle his way around Rick Bye.
Goodyear had to deal with all the oil coming out of Bye's car. This is serious trouble. Rick Bye is out of this race, and that's too bad. Bye was running in third. This is by far his best race so far.
Joe, Rick Bye was getting up out of that speed curbing several times trying to get around Richard Spinard, and he might have damaged the oil pan on the Porsche. He's out of the car now. Appears to be okay, but that's got to be a bitter disappointment for him. He was having a great run here at Mont Tremblant. It is now Scott Goodyear who has picked up that third place position. There you can see Spinard not that far ahead of Goodyear, and this has been a great run for Scott Goodyear from 21st to 3rd, and perhaps still with a shot at that second place car of Richard Spinard.
And you can see Goodyear is still banging that wheel. He's worked his way up from 21st to 3rd, and he's still not satisfied. Now here's the battle for 8th, 9th, and 10th. That's Dirk Homan in car number 50 on the inside. Now it's Cam Champion moves in on the inside into the turn, and he takes over 8th spot.
Great race for that 8th place position. The leader, Jacques Villeneuve, all by himself as he comes out of the hairpin and heads up the back straightaway here at Mont Tremblant. He has a commanding lead on Richard Spinard, and Spinard enjoying a pretty good cushion over the new 3rd place driver, Scott Goodyear.
And Scott Goodyear is going to end up with some big points out of this race. He'll strengthen his lead, heading back to Mosport, the track where he's won 2 races already.
Jacques Villeneuve bringing the Cook Racing Porsche home to the checkered flag. You're with Jacques Villeneuve as he has just a few corners to go. Coming out of the bridge as he heads for Namuro now for the final time. And Jacques has really turned in an inspired drive here this afternoon at Mont Tremblant. There's the Rick Bye Reebok Porsche being pushed away after that oil fire from the broken oil pan. They're still showing a yellow caution flag. Villeneuve comes up into Namuro now for the final time. There you can see Spinard a good distance back, and although Goodyear is closed here, he will not be able to catch Spinard. Just 1 corner to go. The checkered flag is out at the start-finish line. It is Villeneuve across the stripe, and he will win it. Spinard will finish in 2nd, and it'll be Scott Goodyear in 3rd.
And what an incredible piece of driving by Scott Goodyear and an appreciative crowd here at Mont Tremblant.
That race for 4th place coming to the checkered flag, and it'll be Chris Gleason in the Reebok Porsche holding on for 4th.
The final standings with an enviable driving display by Jacques Villeneuve and the Motomaster Cook Porsche as he outclasses Richard Spinard and Scott Goodyear in 3rd. Goodyear continues to lead the championship point standings just ahead of Spinard, and a good effort by Chris Gleason in his best showing this year. Here's a very pleased Jacques Villeneuve.
Well, I'm a charger, so usually I go from the beginning to the end really hard. I had in mind to try hard, see if I could get away, and then after that use the caution. But I kept going away, even by slowing down a little bip. So I just kept going at that pace, hoping that everything would finish.
There's a man who would like to have finished. It's Rick Bye looking for a ride in that 7th place Case Nierop with the offer. That's it for Mont Tremblant, Quebec. Next race is Mosport Park in Ontario. For Pat Gonzalez, this is Joe Tilley. Good afternoon.